Miguel. Greetings to you all. We have joined us this evening from all corners of Zimbabwe, across the Southern African region, the continent of Africa, and abroad, where we have many of our members in the diaspora, as well as colleagues and fellow travelers in the field of social science and in the kind of discussions that we're having today. Today, our ninth policy dialogue for this year, we are co-hosting this as SAPES Trust, a regional organization, with CDD, the Center for Democracy and Development in Maputo. And we're pleased really to be working with the sister organization, especially when the subject is about Mozambique. Before I introduce our eminent moderator, Adriano Mvunga, and the panel, just a bit of a background. First about the SAPES Trust, which was founded in 1987. And often we're forgotten because of the intensity of issues pertaining to Zimbabwe, relating to Zimbabwe, where we seem to have forgotten that SAPES is essentially a regional organization. It's set up more or less on the back of SADC, as inspired by the spirit of SADC at the time. One, solidarity with the liberation struggles of Southern Africa, solidarity with the frontline states, but also as a partner with SADC and other regional organizations in the pursuit of regional integration in our region, but also continental, as part of the AU agenda for integration. And we just come from Africa Day 2 days ago, where we try to renew the spirit of Pan-Africanism and give it relevance. And therefore, in many respects, the topic before us is one that reminds us both of the unfinished business of regional integration, and I dare say also a sad reminder of how much SADC has waned in terms of its mandate. Those of us who were associated and witnessed the formation of SADC in 1980 are almost depressed at the condition in which SADC finds itself. Over the years, but in particular in relation to the crisis in Mozambique. It's been raging since 2017. Thousands have died, millions displaced, and the region and SADC in particular appear incapable of responding adequately and requisitely to the pains and suffering that the member state and its peoples are experiencing in the manner in which the crisis in Cabo Delgado confronts us as a people, as African people. And therefore, our panel today will consider as much the crisis in Cabo Delgado as examining the nature and content of SADC. What is it that appears to have taken the wind out of this organization that shaped much of the region's development in the 80s and 90s? What has gone wrong? And more important, how can we recover as a region and put back on the agenda the mandate, the objectives, of SADC. Our moderator today is Professor Adriano Luvunga, a fellow political scientist, active factor in the Mozambican as civil society sector, and of particular concern to me, interest to me, is that Adriano is in the process of completing a book on the political economy of Mozambique, gas development and nation building. How appropriate, how timely, and Adriano, I can't wait to read that book. Adriano has as his panelists P.S. Pigu. He says he's born in the UK and so on and so forth, but we know him more as a Southern African and a colleague in this business, and a very active observer, commentator on the developments in the region, particularly as a member of the International Crisis Group, but also in his own right as a person who's been very engaged with the issues. And more recently, we relied on him very much to keep us up to date on the developments in Cabo Delgado. And then we have Professor Onalina Salwani. I'm glad to be introducing again, second time on this forum. Onalina and I come a long way. Onalina was my student, one of the most able students I've ever taught. And I was not surprised when she became a professor of sociology in the University of Botswana. And now, happily, she's one of our trustees at SAPES Trust. So, welcome, Onalina. Then we have a Zimbabwean, one of the millions of Zimbabweans in the diaspora. I have to make this mention each time, that as currently we have 75% of all professional Zimbabweans skilled outside the country. And Webster Zambara is one of them at the Institute of Justice and Reconciliation. I just warned him in our language that we intend getting a Hercules plane on these days to drag them all home one day soon. Last but not least, Brian Kagoro, a very close colleague of ours, has been associated with the development of organizations like SAPES itself, and is an active, been central, a luminary in the civic movement in Zimbabwe from the days of the National Constitutional Assembly, its development, the formation of the opposition movement in Zimbabwe, but now an active member of the international organizations. He's a prominent lawyer. Brian is a master of all trades, I would say, and a real able interlocutor on such subjects. So, Chef Professor Adriano Luvunga, I hand over to you, sir. I would want to just say before I hand over to you that I also have two prominent Southern Africans who would be invited to say something soon after your panelists. That is Chris Maroleng, the Executive Director of GGA, Global Governance Africa, an active member of our forum. You'd like to say something? And so I hope, Chris, you are there. And then my former student, Mozambican, Martino Achua, too, you'll be on standby to come in. So, Chef, obrigado. Adriano, Professor Luvunga. Professor Nuvunga. Professor.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello, can you hear me now?
We can hear you now, yes.
Yes, good afternoon, colleagues and dear participants at this important seminar on Mozambique's crisis in northern Cabo Delgado and how SADC is positioning itself to intervene. Most colleagues here in Mozambique don't like this term intervention. They prefer participation of SADC in helping Mozambique repel violent extremism in northern Mozambique. Most of the colleagues in this panel today, they have been active in calling for SADC to intervene. Piers, Chris, and other colleagues, they have been championing this call because this security crisis, not only it has been lingering for 3 years, causing Mozambique's biggest humanitarian crisis since independence, but also it has created losses in economic terms as it is sitting in between Mozambique and its population to harness from its world-class gas reserves in northern Mozambique, and the possibility of this violent extremism to spill over to the region. And this is where SADC really is important and instrumental. A few weeks ago, the double troika here in Maputo ended with SADC deploying a technical assessment mission, which it has concluded its work with a report that was shared the way it was shared, but the actual summit did not take place. And with that happening, my president went on to visit Rwanda and then to the France-Africa Summit. There is a lot of expectation as to what the outcome of today's summit in Maputo will be. I'm being told that the summit has just ended, and we hope to share and discuss some of the outcomes as they will be reaching our WhatsApps while we are here today. So in the interest of time, I will quickly ask our first panelist. I understand that my good colleague, Brian Kagoro, is asking to be the first to intervene because he has another commitment in the next 20 minutes or so. So I will quickly ask my good colleague, Brian, to intervene. I hope he's already here. Brian, are you there? I have welcome, Brian.
I'm here.
Oh yes,
I look
thank
different,
you.
But I'm here.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. As I have mentioned, the summit has just ended. We don't have the communique as yet. There is lots of excitement and expectation. There is an understanding that from Mozambique side, finally, the political leadership is understanding that SADC is key. SADC's participation in helping Mozambique is key. And my two questions to you, how do you see SADC's kind of capacity to intervene, also considering Mozambique's initial reluctance to open up for SADC's participation? And how do you see SADC in such a context where there is a crisis which has the potential of spillover in the region on the one hand, on the other, there are human rights issues here. Yet the regional bloc, SADC, is not being given the way to participate. How do you see this in terms of SADC, its regional constructive dialogue as the body that it has to make sure that in the region there is peace and security, yet there are issues of sovereignty that Mozambique has really been kind of resisting based on? How do you see that, Brian, evolving, and SADC's regional coherence? How do you see that, Brian?
Adriano, thank you so much to CDD, and thank you to SAPES for having me on, and my apologies for leaving. I will leave after 1 hour. Let me just say that for most of SADC, Mozambique is not a foreign policy issue. It's a domestic policy issue, which reflects fundamentally, first and foremost, Adriano, not on the capacity of SADC as an intergovernmental platform, but on the capacity of SADC states, and in particular, what we face in Mozambique, the insurgency, which has violent extremist tinges and the possibility of politicized faith, whichever way you characterize it, is the first that any of the liberation movements in SADC have had to face. So first and foremost, it is a fundamental shock to each of the individual states. But beyond that, it is a domestic issue for all the states. Why? There is a question of states' capacity around security beyond repression of citizens and oppositional group. Second, there's the question of historical grievances in regions of countries that are resource rich, that have remained underdeveloped with some form of apartheid system. And third, there is the development and demography conflict nexus, that you have a lot of young people in fairly underdeveloped and neglected parts of countries that are resource rich, where elites and foreign companies have been exploiting. So which therefore means it is a fundamental challenge for SADC, because the preponderance of foreign interest in northern Mozambique are only rivaled by what we saw in Congo. So we have the French connection, we have the Russian connection, we now have the Americans with some interest, whether the interests are financial or within the extractive sector or their security. It essentially means that any play made internationally, regionally, is actuated and driven by the interests of the dominant external actor and its proxies in Maputo. Why is this important? The securocratic states that the liberation movements morphed into were ill-disposed to deal with developmental questions. So one of the scandals of the north of Mozambique is the gross underdevelopment of that part of the country, number one. But number two, the second scandal is the lack of a coherent plan that's not military to deal with the grievance question. So dealing with northern Mozambique purely in its security and military context essentially means that SADC as a body has to contend with the foreign interests. It has to contend whether it's American, French, and etc. But dealing with northern Mozambique in a holistic sense as a social, developmental, and economic transformation question essentially means that SADC would have a leverage. This will force SADC, my brothers and sisters, to move beyond a very narrow securocratic redress or approach to issues of social. So fundamentally, it seems SADC's capacity as a body, SADC's nature as a body is in question. Is SADC an intergovernmental body like ECOWAS? Is SADC capable of intervening? Is SADC Secretariat sufficiently strong enough to take decisions? Is the Troika system adequate where one of the member states is involved? I would surmise and I would conclude that we have a form of intergovernmental status. We have a fairly weak secretariat in terms of, in comparative analysis, its power when you compare it to ECOWAS. We also have a weak will towards regional integration in SADC. Never mind the big policies and declarations that we make. We are actually behind ECOWAS and other regions in terms of being a little bit more deliberate. Yet we've been frontline states for much longer. We faced insecurity and questions of transformation much longer as we were SADC and so on and so forth. So long and short of this is we are seeing a fundamental and test to the liberation movement governments that's emanating not from opposition political parties, but from military or militaristic groups. And these are governments that have been happy to govern through military means. Now they face military threats from a very diffuse, very deadly, internationally aligned set of insurgents. And this is a first.
Brian, for those brief comments that you made, I have taken 3 main points. One, that Mozambique's conflict is a socio-economic and developmental issue. So it speaks to domestic issues. You have alluded to the different players that are involved in Mozambique's conflict. You have alluded to the challenges within SADC itself, including its secretariat in comparative terms to in relation to ECOWAS and others. Thank you very much, Brian. I would quickly go to Dr. Ona Lena Selolwane from Botswana.
Thank you for struggling with my name. Can you hear me?
Yes, clearly.
Okay.
Clearly. Let me ask you a direct question.
Yeah.
As I've indicated, we have been calling for SADC to intervene in Mozambique before this insurgency has taken roots. And SADC was also reluctant to speak in strong terms. It has taken time. Has SADC missed opportunities here? Has SADC made mistakes here and there in the way that it engaged with Mozambique?
That's a very good question. Maybe let me start by correcting my former professor there. My university actually never saw me fit to be conferred a professorship. It is some cloth that I am dressed in every time I interact with others outside Botswana. I am just simply Dr. Ona Lena Selolwane on the basis of my PhD, and it ends there. But you've asked a very pertinent question about SADC's reluctance to intervene. I want to concur with Brian on how he summarizes the issues, because it is one thing to bandage a festering wound and think that somehow it will go away, but another completely to deal with the root causes that will make for sustained and long-term impact that takes away the ground, the fertile ground that makes insurgencies and international interventions from those who are seeking to actually put their feet and roots within that context of unattended, ignored grievances that are long-term. But I would like to add another dimension that when you talk about SADC, we do have a tendency to think of SADC in terms of the institution that brings state parties, governments together. And basically ignoring that when you are talking about SADC, we are also talking about the citizens of SADC outside the state, the individuals in their individuality as well as in their collectives, whether they are, it's collective as in business companies, collectives as in NGOs, churches, etc. When we talk about intervention, we should also broaden the call for intervention in terms of what are all these other non-state parties contributing to the resolution of this festering problem. In the context of SADC as the institution where our political leaders come together occasionally to break bread, we are talking about an institution that speaks to governance failure within the individual states of SADC, as well as the collective that brings these political leaders together. So Brian's diagnosis of the social underlying problems really gets to the core of the issues. And speaking as a citizen of the Republic of Botswana, which many regard as when African states are ranked, Botswana is normally accorded a significant clapping that it performs better in governance terms than most of its sister countries. The latest governance report published this year, Chandler report, would put Botswana at third place, the third highest ranking state on the continent of Africa in terms of governance by governments, in terms of the areas, 6 key areas of governance, and the 7th being what has been the impact of the governance performance on individuals, on people, and people's upliftment. Now, if Botswana is 3rd ranking in the continent of Africa, and yet in terms of the impact of all the developmental efforts on people, give Botswana a clear failure, that Botswana fails abysmally in delivering upliftment to its people. Whether you look at it from the education, from the health, we fail. And we are 3rd best after Mozambique, after Mauritius and Rwanda, 3rd best. And the rest of the continent trailing somewhere behind them. So if 3rd ranking is a failure in terms of social development, what chances are there that the institution that brings together our governments would perform better than these governments are capable of doing within their own national boundaries? Nothing. After so many years of independence, we really shouldn't be looking at our governments as the potential sources of calmness and resolution of problems. The institution hasn't geared itself to actually achieve the social development goals that each and every one of our nation states basically promise to their people. And so the next question is to ask ourselves whether us as citizens of this subcontinent and the rest of the continent, are we ready to also play a significant part? My answer to you, my brother, in terms of the SADC, the reluctance comes from the fact that these states recognize their own failures within their own countries. If they can't succeed there, they cannot really succeed in going to the core of the problem. The terror of intervening where sovereignty is always the question, because unlike other countries in other parts of the world, sovereignty in Africa basically means the means for a nice checkbook, the means for income of all those who are in leadership. And so they are not about to upset the apple cart. We change leaders, and before you know it, despite the rhetoric, corruption is always just next door, just behind. It follows the rhetoric. So given the pain that the majority of the citizens of the continent and the subcontinent have to go through, are we then willing as individuals to continue to allow this to fester? Because some of us with the nice certificates and university education, we can just about survive in reasonable comfort relative to the majority of our fellow citizens. How long will people continue to tolerate where we allow natural resources to benefit a handful of us, because we have had the privilege of education and understand how we can navigate the world to ensure that we live in comfortable homes and have comfortable incomes and can send our kids to the best universities that the world can offer. That is how I would like us to look at it. Yes, we can apply first aid, bandages over the festering problem of Mozambique. The military solution can never be a social developmental solution. It can only ever be first aid. Now, if there's nothing that follows first aid, there is death. There is perpetuation of conflict.
Thank you so much, Dr. Onalena Selolwan. You were clear, emphatic, and loud, saying SADC reluctance, it reflects governance failure at home of SADC member states. Brian had said that SADC has a weak secretariat compared to other regional blocs, and he has also interrogated and casting doubts on the troika system as the mechanism that SADC has in place, and you have unpacked it further to say that we, as the citizens of SADC, we are waiting for solutions from an entity that reflects governance failures at home. And you also said that the militaristic approach just for clarification, SADC's technical mission has presented to the table a proposal of deploying 3,000 soldiers for Northern Mozambique, including submarines. You say that this, it can be good as a bandage for Mozambique, but it will not address the issues that Brian has alluded to, which speak to the developmental failure in Mozambique, and particularly in Northern Mozambique, as the key roots to this problem, and also the issue of elitism associated to international corporations that are benefiting from this. Piers, I would like to have your take first. Where do you think that this proposal for 3,000 soldiers comes from? Who will pay for this? This is number one. Number two, do you think that it reflects a thorough assessment of the problem in Northern Cabo Delgado? But also, and importantly, can SADC sustain that? Do you see capacity within SADC for such deployment? But also taking it from a historical perspective, SADC had issues in Lesotho. SADC had issues in the DRC. Do you see SADC sustaining this? We do not yet know the outcome of the summit. Do you think this is something that speaks to the reality, the ground that you know very well? Two, where does this come from? Thirdly, is this something sustainable?
Adriano, thanks very much for the question, and let me also thank SAPES for the invitation. Obviously, we would have all liked to have seen how the heads of state double troika meeting has responded to SADC's technical mission, and one only has to look. We were lucky, I suppose, that the technical mission, from a civil society perspective at least, that we have some insights into at least the main report of that technical assessment mission, and we can see that the groups that were there, and these come from a military security background within SADC, that were participating in this, from the double troika states, excluding Mozambique, but including Angola, that they, from start to finish, it took 1 week to conduct their assessment. And it's clear that they got their briefings internally within Mozambique from the security sector, from the intelligence sector. And it's clear that they did not speak to a range of actors that have been watching developments, watching the issues, looking at concerns that impact on hard security, that go beyond the hard security paradigm. We also understand that there was some resistance from elements in Mozambique for the team to spend more time on the ground in Cabo Delgado. So they literally had a day in Pemba. They didn't really get out there and get their feet wet and see for themselves what was going on. They were unable to, for instance, fly over the terrain and have a proper look at the areas where combat would be necessary, for example. Obviously, we didn't see the important annexures that are attached to the main body of the report, but it's clear that the assessment was superficial. I mean, I've read CDD's own assessment, which he published quite recently, of the report, which I think raises a number of extremely important critiques of the assumptions that are contained in the analysis there. And I think, I would recommend everyone have a look at that. It's not a lengthy critique, but it raises some extremely important issues about the premises that on which a military intervention is recommended. But bear in mind, the report makes 3 recommendations. First is the one around training and logistics and supply. The second is the deployment of the 3,000 that you've just spoken of. And the third, which is the mission's real recommendation, is the combination of the 2. So what might come out, given the resistance that we've seen from Maputo to the notion of boots on the ground, is some kind of halfway house that would allow some level of training and technical and logistical support, with perhaps some bespoke assets from the region that could be provided in terms of assistance on the ground. But there's a kind of some caveats to that, of course, and one is that whoever operates in there, and this is a sort of a general takeaway from the report itself, concern is about the huge intelligence deficit that exists on the ground in Mozambique, in terms of an understanding of exactly what is going on with respect to the nature of the threat, from a hard security perspective, at least. I think there are some elements in terms of the recommendations which are important and reflect certain realities, such as the need for beefing up coastal security. Whether or not that should involve a submarine, of course, is questionable for a number of people in terms of costs and sustainability. And that lends to your question about, does the region have the capacity? Now, officially on paper, the region's had a standby force available to it since 2017. In reality, that's not the case, and we know that. And there has been some question about what countries and individual countries could contribute to even that 3,000 deployment. Bear in mind, it's always going to be more than 3,000, as we've seen with the FIB Force Intervention Brigade in the DRC, which has already taken up significant resources from the Malawian, Tanzanian, and South African military. This is about turnover of troops and assets and capacity, and so it's always much more than appears on paper. And then we're not even going to get into, and which countries can provide those specific assets right now. You know, in terms of the special forces component that is recommended, certainly there are some elements inside the region that can provide special forces and still have some measure of competency and capability, and have some training capacity, some training experience together within the context of the standby force. And then there's an absence of commentary about, perhaps one of the most important things is how an integrated command structure would fit in with the Mozambican forces itself, and the concerns that many have in the region about the competency of the Mozambican security forces, but at the same time recognizing that the Mozambicans should be a real lead agency and really the face of this, certainly in terms of politics of sovereignty and so forth, that Mozambique really does need to be front and center in this. And so there's a lot of concerns about how those modalities would be worked out, how chains of command would operate on the ground, how intelligence would be strengthened, leakages on supply chains and within the intelligence community would be patched up and strengthened and so forth. I mean, we've seen over the last year basic things such as ensuring that there's a supply of fuel to helicopter gunships being flown by mercenaries has been a huge challenge for the security forces. The lack of communication capacity between air, land, and sea. As a colleague of mine explains, it's been like watching security forces pushing bad food around the plate, not winning. I mean, we see this kind of winning narrative from the Mozambican forces, but often it's about strategic withdrawals by insurgents and so forth. And we don't really have an honest conversation about what's going on the ground from the Mozambican government on this issue, or indeed on a number of other issues. And I think this is a huge challenge, that we don't have an honest narrative in play at the moment. Finally, how would this be paid for? Clearly, in the context of our own challenges in the region, economic challenges compounded by COVID and so forth, there is no money to pay for this, and there will have to be a handout to the international community. And I think the international community will be tempered in terms of what it's prepared to support at this juncture. There are tentative offers out there for support on all sorts of fronts, and some of that lends to Maputo's own preference for bilateral engagement in terms of developing. And some countries in the region are also happy to play bilaterally, although they would like to also dance under the legitimacy of the SADC hat on this. And there may be some way of putting some kind of a SADC hat on top of a range of bilateral arrangements. But if this is not part of an integrated, clear and workable strategy, which doesn't seem to be on the table, this is something SADC, to its credit, has been pushing for almost a year now from Maputo, and has been frustrated because it's been presented with shopping lists from Maputo and has not been brought to the table. Now, let's not assume that SADC marches in step. There's lots of fault lines and fissures between the member states here. And there's lots of different interests in play. And of course, this is shrouded in secrecy on the one hand, but also shrouded in this mask of unity, which in many respects has not been in play with respect to how they're dealing with this unique situation there. So, Adriano, I think that we can expect some movement from this summit today, but even if there was an agreement on key aspects of the technical assessment mission report, it's going to be a very long time before we actually see practical implementation of those agreements on the ground. And that raises two questions for me. One is, what are the priority security concerns at the moment, which of course, as Dr. Selwani has mentioned, might band-aid things, but we do need some security stability in order for the broader human security framework that needs to be developed to be implemented. We can't just, but we also need a hard security intervention that doesn't worsen that situation. And at the same time, we are faced with a really rapidly deteriorating humanitarian situation, which is not getting the attention it deserves and is likely to get worse rapidly in the coming months. And we know the international agencies and domestic agencies are under enormous strain at the moment. So there are some immediate issues that require attention. And I would say as a last point that SADC must intervene, but it must intervene with the prioritization of human security concerns at the forefront of its intervention. Sadly, the technical mission, assessment mission, does not raise those issues adequately, gives a 1 or 2 line throwaway to the humanitarian situation and the need to deal with those issues. And I think that I would hope that there is a recommendation to see how those issues can be built on the framework of that initial foundation of hard security, of the hard security focus that we've seen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Piers, for these comments. The issues around the assessment of the technical mission by SADC, we commented on that. The issues related to the funding for this potential SADC mission, the various options. But you have unpacked the issue of governance from Mozambique side when it comes to the state defense forces. The key challenges there, and the comment you make is that SADC, they can come in, they can support, but they cannot replace and they cannot repair some of the key governance problems within Mozambique's security and defense and defense forces. Thank you very much. I turn on now to Professor Webster Zambara. We were told two things we know now. One is that we were expecting the Tanzania president to attend the summit. She did not. Number two, this meeting was taking place not at the convention center but at the presidency of the Republic here in Maputo. Two questions. The issue of, is this the SADC we want? This SADC that it meets in the premises of the presidencies. It is really this SADC that will address the problems of governance, but they meet, close the door in the premises of the presidency. Second, there is the issue of coherence within SADC as a regional bloc. There are issues, for instance, in the border between Mozambique and Tanzania. President Nyusi, my president, is the chair of SADC. So he calls for this summit. Tanzania is not attending the summit. But the President Nyusi himself, the day that the Maputo summit was postponed, he went to see Kagame. Kagame is out from the region. He is not part of SADC. And then he went on to Paris to address some of the key Africa's problems in Paris. Only then he came back to convene the colleagues within SADC. Is this the SADC that you see that will legitimately address the problems in the region? Over to you, Professor.
Thank you, my friend Adriano. Thank you, SAPES Trust and CDD. I want to just clarify one thing, Adriano. I am not a professor. I am just Dr. Webster Zambara. But I know sometimes in Mozambique, professory is accepted. Yeah. Just being a teacher. I'm a teacher by profession. Thank you. Key issues have been raised already that I think tempt me to make a quick answer when you say, is this the SADC we want? I would say no. This is not the SADC we want. And I will say why. When you say the president of Tanzania did not attend, it begs a lot of questions, because like my colleague Brian said, the issue of Mozambique should not be seen as an outside issue. It is a home issue. And just look at the geography of Mozambique. Mozambique borders South Africa, Swaziland, Zimbabwe, Zambia, Malawi, Tanzania, and put Indian Ocean across, there's Madagascar. So if anything happens in Mozambique, already all the border countries can easily be affected, and it's in the making. We are seeing it. The second reason why I would say this is not the SADC we want is that on 30 March, someone called Joseph Kalimbre sent a tweet to Madam Dr. Stegomina Tex, the executive secretary of SADC. He said, Executive Secretary, for how long will you remain silent on the crisis in Mozambique? Is it only the death of Magufuli that matters? Africans are being killed every day in that country, but there's not been a single statement from SADC. Show leadership. Madam Tex responded directly to Joseph Kalimbre, and her response is as follows. She asks, will just a statement from the executive secretary of SADC change the situation? Be assured that SADC member states are working with Mozambique, a sovereign country, on this complex matter. I think this response was very unfortunate and quite disheartening, because Joseph Kalimbre and every one of us would have expected our most senior regional civil servant to give a response that was empathetic and more passionate than the response that I just read out. we have got a lot of expectations. I think perhaps we have too much expectations from SADC. And Zimbabweans will tell you that those expectations have been dashed many times, especially during election period, where the citizens of SADC have a lot of trust. And I can say, I think this trust, we built it because of a generation of leaders who formed SADC, and a generation of leaders who publicly and honestly displayed a Pan-African agenda. When you talk of Zeye Nyerere, KK, Zambia Kaunda, Samora Machel, Chisano, Mozambique, Robert Mugabe in Zimbabwe, back then, Mandela, Thabo Mbeki, Seke Tumile Masire, when you talk of Namibia, Nuyoma, those leaders had a sense and stature such that in my interaction with former executive secretary of SADC, Dr. Simba Makoni, he talks of a visit in Zambia where someone was asked, do you know SADC? And in Makeni district, I think. He says, oh, yes, we know SADC. SADC must be very important. And Dr. Makoni asked, why do you think it is important? And the common person said, I think it's important because our president always goes there. So we know in August, the pilgrimage happens, and all our national radio stations will be talking of this very important summit that the head of state and the delegation, sometimes a delegation of over half of the cabinet, and the airport will be full, people going to SADC. So there's an expectation. And when you are holding elections, there's an expectation that our elections may become, they are monitors from SADC, so things could happen better. But many countries and in many situations have been disappointed. So I am quite disappointed by SADC. Going back, in 2003, SADC signed a mutual defense pact. And this mutual defense pact, Article 6 says, and I quote, an armed attack against a state party shall be considered a threat to regional peace and security, and such attack shall be met with immediate collective action. So here we have, it's a signed document, it's a pact, but in practice, like my colleagues have already indicated, we see a lack of capacity within these institutions, including failure to implement its own plans, activities, and strategies. When you look at the current situation in Mozambique, we talk of SADC brigades, like Piers just said, is there on paper. But in 2007, a memorandum of understanding to establish the SADC brigade was signed. And one article that is there, one point is that all logistical resources, all logistics resources and services rendered to the SADC brigade as required and agreed upon shall be financed by SADC. So on paper, you see something that may appear to be some commitment, but in practice, we are not seeing it. And I think the kind of leadership that we had back then is totally different from what we now have. So you would recall even the military exercises, as peace support exercises that happened before Blue Ngwe in Zimbabwe in 1997, Blue Crane in South Africa in 1999, Tanzanite in Tanzania 2002, exercise Tohomo in Botswana 2005, ex-Gofinyo in South Africa 2009. After that, for the past 12 years, I think there's only been one exercise, if I'm not mistaken. So for 12 years, a joint military exercise in molding a SADC brigade, we have just had one. But the region is now becoming more complex. And if we are not careful, the situation in Mozambique we should have learned some lessons from the Boko Haram insurgents in Nigeria that is still causing havoc now, and Al-Shabaab insurgents in East Africa that are troubling the region. So the case that this is the SADC we want, no, certainly not. I don't want this SADC where our security is under threat. But then the issue now of coherence, like Agoro said earlier, the Mozambican case is now an international case because of resources natural. And this, the presence of France to assist militarily in Southern Africa, I think, and possibly Rwanda being involved, it is actually an indictment on the SADC leadership and every one of us, because this broader internationalization of this case is a danger to us. And one thing that is also missing in establishing the Mutual Defense Pact, there's a civilian element that should have been established to support military action. But this has been sidelined ever since 2003. And sometimes I've had some training of civilian mediators that happened 2 years ago to support the mediation support unit at SADC. But this fledgling unit is still very weak, and so much is missed because you don't see SADC heads of state trusting civil society or engaging civil society that may even have more wealth in terms of intellectual knowledge, and they interact with the community much better. So the reliance and the expectation of leaders and the military, the challenge is always there. But then also this idea of collective action that I read throughout is only on paper. In practice, we did not see collective action in Lesotho in 1998. We did not see collective action in DRC 98. We did not see it in DRC 2013. We did not see it in Madagascar in 2009. We did not see it in Zimbabwe 2019. We are not seeing collective action again in Mozambique. So we seem to have too much expectation, but so little being delivered. And the SADC peace and security architecture, which is supposed to be guiding us, is also on paper. You would know that they will tell you we have a panel of eminent persons, which will be so almost like a panel of the wise, who often old gray-haired men and who sometimes are engaged. But I want to end by saying sometimes this reliance of this elderly, I'm not an anti-ageist myself, but I've grown to realize that much as we say wisdom comes with age, I now know that sometimes age comes alone. Thank you.
Hey, thank you very much, Dr. Zambara. SADC, it's a tiger on paper. It's a tiger on paper, and we have lots of expectations as citizens. What Dr. Selelwa said, that because of the governance failure or leadership failure in our countries, and because of the role that SADC has played during the frontline states in championing the liberation of neighbor countries, we still expect the same kind of enthusiasm and some form of collective action that Dr. Zambara has clearly pointed out that it is no longer there. We tend to see more within SADC, 1 or 2 member states actively engaging in finding a solution in a neighboring country. But the reality, though, is that much of the excitement, it has come from civil society. It has come from the citizens. And by the end of these summits, the political leaders, they shake hands, they salute each other, and no meaningful roadmaps and solutions are put out there, even at the level of bandaging some of these hoods. Dr. Onal, what do you expect of the future of SADC? What really is the future of SADC? Can SADC survive if it failed to meaningfully participate in Mozambique's crisis?
Thank you for giving me the mic. Maybe to start appreciating what Piers had indicated, because he went into the more technical analysis of the failures on the ground, because you can't act without information. That obviously when people are dying, we need a buffer to stop the human rights crisis. We need something that first aid. For me, after so many years of independence, and I speak particularly of Botswana, where at independence, we had only five graduates, 5 people who had gone to university. And now we have hundreds and hundreds, some of whom are unemployed. Surely, those of us who have benefited in the hundreds, I know that SADC is not quite similar. When you look at what Zimbabwe has produced in terms of training its people to be capable, to be skilled, despite problems of political leadership. And then you look at what Zambia is very, very quietly doing without great show, despite whatever international ranking that Zambia has. You go to Zambia, you find that Zambia has manufactured a lot of things locally, which gives Zambians an edge over Botswana, despite the differences in international ranking. If you go to each and every one of our countries, there is something salvageable. Then you ask yourself, if we are interested in building the SADC that we want, we cannot and dare not leave that in the hands of politicians. It's too important to live in the hands of politicians. We have to start looking at what the ordinary citizens of this subcontinent ought to be doing to build a future that does not threaten life and limb. When there is internal strife, when there is war, civil war, yeah, we can name the international interests as if they are the sole drivers of the crisis. But bottom line is that we have failed, and that's why they are there. Why is it that after more than 5 decades of Africa's independence, you still need a French company to come and mine resources in Mozambique, in Botswana, in all these countries? Why do we still do that? Because for me, that is an eloquent statement on our failures? Are we saying that within our countries, we do not have human beings with capacity after more than 5 decades to actually run our minds, to run our businesses, so that they get busy with building wealth, so that we don't spend too much time fighting over resources, but spend energies on ensuring that those resources benefit the citizens equally. The fact that you have international players mining our resources means that we continue to have governments that are propped up by external forces, and therefore owe their allegiance first and foremost to outside interests and zilch to their own citizens. Yes, let us have some band-aid to stop the fire from basically killing and pushing people out. But it is time we start engaging on ensuring that our resources are mined by us, so that our governments begin to respect their own citizens above external forces. We may not have the technology, but hey, have we not produced enough engineers in the subcontinent? Do we not have people with capacity to mobilize resources so that we are the ones that exploit our resources? Because as long as we depend on others, despite our capability as citizens, our future will always hang on a string where all you need is a bunch of politicians with vested interests colluding with a handful of international players. I believe that we have potential to build the SADC that we want, a SADC whose roots and whose feet are firmly placed on the shoulders of its citizens. We have to start dialoguing on how the citizens can hold their governments to account, can take over in the exploitation of their resources without the usual scramble for unfit grabbers to just oust the foreigners. We need to plan strategically on how to make our resources and the management of our resources, in fact, democratic. We haven't arrived there yet, but we have the human resources and the capacity to do so. Hello? So to your question, say, I do not have quick band-aid solutions. I'm much more interested in what we can do in a sustainable manner as citizens. We have failed our governments by allowing them to run roughshod over us, to deliver nothing. Together we can actually, there is nothing impossible about managing natural resources. We can't complain that we are not educated. So the future I see is a future where the citizens begin to take responsibility and stop moaning about the failures of governments. If we cannot democratize the management of resources, it will be business as usual with no solution. We cannot put great expectations on failed systems We have to have system alignment that begins with each and every one of us as individuals and as collectives. Our future lies that way, not in what our governments can do. We have given them plenty of opportunity. They have failed us and will continue to fail us until we recognize that the power is actually in our hands. And it begins with natural resource management. It begins with us knowing and accepting that if those resources do not benefit the collective, we are digging our own graves.
Thank you very much, Dr. Onalan Selelwan, for those remarks. You were strong on the issue of nature versus governance. In your perspective, the more we fail to take the leadership in harnessing these resources, the more we'll have problems. But in the case of Mozambique, we have seen more problems related to intra-governance domestically, and less the participation of the international oil companies. If you looking into the contracts that government has signed with these international oil companies, they are not good. They are far too reloaded in that companies get paid first and only then money will flow to the country. But if governance is right, it can allow in a relatively short period of time for national oil company to become operator. And I think that is the way that countries in Norway, in the UAE, Qatar, they have done it. The problem is that in Africa, you have countries that have started exploring natural resources before I was born. But they, with same number of inhabitants, but until today, 5 decades on, they cannot provide water for less than 1 million inhabitants. I was shocked when visiting Equatorial Guinea. They have started exporting oil before I was born, and their population is the size of the population of the capital city of Maputo. But until today, we have people without potable water to drink. This is a problem. Why other nations are learning nations, and our African nations are failing. This is a debate that we will have one day. Today, it's SADC. And I'm reading some questions from our chat box. Those are very much into how people view SADC today as an entity of solidarity of the elites that have captured democracies in Southern Africa, rather than the SADC as a collective institution to protect and defend democracies in our region. Peers, how do you view this? We have challenges. the Mozambique has preferred to deploy private military groups and less forthcoming to engage its peer countries for support. Why do you think that is the case? Don't you think that it has contributed to further undermine SADC and also SADC's reluctance to intervene?
Adriano, while we've been speaking, the SADC communique has come in, and I'm afraid I will answer that question, but let me just share with the audience that so we're no longer holding our breath, that SADC has once again kicked the can down the road to another extraordinary summit on the 20th of June, not saying it is going to do anything at this juncture, and various platitudes about praising the setting up of a humanitarian and emergency center, et cetera, So nothing really out of this summit in terms of any concrete decisions or actions, but at least locking down for a dedicated summit. And it looks like if it's an extraordinary summit, it'll be the heads of state, all of the heads of state there. So perhaps we'll actually see some kind of decision being made at that. But I think that's probably the best that we can hope for. I don't think that there's really any surprises there, even if we all hoped to see something out of this. They basically have said that they have considered the report and recommendations, and that's all we've got. Really, it's typically worded communique with not much there. I'm sure you'll have a look at it, and we can share that. I've just got a couple of photographs that were just sent through on that. So unfortunately, no real clarity and no real immediate sense of urgency, I think, with respect to the immediate security and humanitarian conditions. One would have hoped for a upfront and loud call from the region for assistance to the international community or something along those lines to address a situation that is clearly out of control. You know, 75% of the over, I mean, officially it's now about 750,000 IDPs in communities that are struggling. 80% of those IDPs are in host communities, not in camps. Huge tensions emerging, a real chance that there'll be a break in the food line and a reduction of rations and so forth. I mean, it really is an appalling situation which necessitates the leadership of this region to say something. And I'm afraid, you know, platitudes of solidarity and commitments to dealing with these issues, frankly, I don't think is good enough. But it is very much in line with what we've seen before, sadly. Turning to your question briefly, you know, there's been a big question in a number of people's minds about why would Mozambique, which clearly can't deal with this security situation, not turn to folk that are saying they're prepared to come in and help? You know, it kind of puzzles a lot of people. There was a very interesting piece written by R.W. Johnson, of all people, who I know comes with a certain amount of political baggage, but he wrote a piece that was published a few weeks ago that looked at the allegations which have been circling in the background around issues of the drug trade and the fact of key elements within the political and governance circles and their relationships with certain business folk that are related to this trade, and that part of the decision making is to keep eyes off the arena of bad behavior around illicit economies. Essentially, it's worth a read. You know, if one can cut through some of the hyperbole, I think it raises a range of interesting questions, which I know have been circulating for a long time in relation to the concerns which relate to governance, institutional weaknesses, and so forth, and even questions that go far as saying, who is benefiting from the war economy, for example? Is there really a desire to end this crisis in that arena? Is this a fight between cartel interests within Mozambique? How do these things interface and interrelate? And again, much of this is based on single source information, weak evidentiary base and so forth. But it raises the broader question that these discussions need to be had around the governance concerns, but also how those governance concerns relate to elite accumulation strategies and marginalization, which fundamentally have undermined the development paradigm, not just in Cabo Delgado, but and other areas of the north and central Mozambique as well, which face a number of these problems. One thing I'll say about the use of private military companies, this is not going to go away, I think. And certainly PMCs are still hawking for opportunities in Mozambique. It's one of the biggest games in town at the moment. And, you know, I do think that there needs to be a discussion about the role of PMCs. They are a reality in modern warfare that we cannot escape. We are rather trapped in Southern Africa with the paradigm of the nasty white mercenaries. And while those have been a reality on this continent, there are issues around PMC activity which we need to look at in terms of what they can bring to the table. There was a very interesting report in June last year, written in Mozambique by a Mozambican think tank about the rebooting of the Mozambican military and the role that PMCs can play in terms of dealing with some of the hard security issues that are in play. I want to give you an example of and I'm not saying that it would necessarily work, but PMCs that are active in the field, so to speak, and we saw DAG, the Dyke Advisory Group, active in the field, and the allegations that remain unresolved relating to indiscriminate killing of civilians. They were involved in also in the training of an elite unit of the police as a part of their expanded contract in the second part of last year. That unit, which had trainers from former 3-2 Battalion and other South African units, I'm talking about Angolans that were fighting within the South African Army, the apartheid army, who are older guys now, but have been involved in training. These are Angolans that were moved down to South Africa in the early 90s and have experience across the continent. They trained a number of the police units and I'm talking a company of about 120 guys. And this unit apparently has been one of the most effective fighting forces in the Mozambican army during the course of the first half of this year, and was instrumental in the retaking of Palma initially with a group of 40 men. There are capacities in the Mozambican army and security forces, if properly engaged, that can turn this army around. But that's a long-term strategy. And I think, you know, what we're faced with is with a government that thinks that it can put together a little bit from here, a little bit from there, in terms of cobbling together a security response that will somehow address this problem in Cabo Delgado. I can't see that happening, even with private security, an effective private security component there, because private security can bring things to the table that armies can't. Thanks, Adriana.
Thank you very much, Piers. Chris Maroleng, my colleague from GGA, we have governance failure here. We have governance failure. I would say we have a failure of democracy to deliver regional development. And you have a failure of mechanisms for the young people to participate. You have elite competitions, you have cartels here, and you have a SADC which has been failing really to meet its basic standards as set in its charter. How do you view this problem evolving in Mozambique and in the context of the region? Chris Maloleng. Chris Maloleng, are you there? Hello, Chris. Hello, Chris. I think you might have left. I'm talking about governance failure in terms of governance generating development, governance generating the mechanisms for people to meaningfully participate in governance. Can some of these conflicts be the way that the young people, marginalized regions are finding to express themselves? Martino, Shashua. Hello, Martino.
Yes. Good evening, and thank you for the invitation. Well, I have been listening very attentively the discussion, which is quite pertinent and unearthing a lot of some of the things that trouble our minds across the region. The one aspect that I haven't seen in the discussion, and I wanted to bring it up, is the fact that I think when you look at the way the Cabo Delgado issue has been dealt with within SADC, the one first thing that comes to mind is that there is a lot of mistrust amongst the leadership of the region, because it doesn't make sense that President Nyusi goes out of the region before he agrees with his peers around here of what to do. And that seems to be the case. While the international community seems to be saying, well, we are waiting for SADC, at least at the multilateral level, most of the organizations hiding behind the subsidiarity issue, they are saying SADC should tell us what to do. And yet, I think the Mozambican authorities have preferred to go everywhere else except in SADC circles to discuss the matter before even discussing with the SADC peers. So to me, that's an indication of how deep mistrust amongst the leadership of the region that still exists. I don't know why, whether that's a reflection of the legacy of guerrilla movements, maybe, but I think it's something also to look at. The little trust we had of the liberation, the first liberation leaders, I think has waned away. And we are likely to see this more and more as we move. I won't go into other issues that have been adequately covered by many of your speakers that preceded me. I would stop there. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. The issue of trust, yes, it is there, but we would have expected the SADC leaders to engage the African Union. they've also failed. The Secretariat of SADC has failed to engage the African Union. President Nyusi went to see President Kagame outside of the framework of the African Union. Why the Secretariat has failed to engage the African Union, seeing that Mozambique has been reluctant to have SADC, perhaps due to the issues that have been alluded to here. But also, we have to take into account that as part of leadership failure in our countries, elections haven't necessarily been free and fair in some of our countries, Mozambique included. In the most recent election, a human rights defender, an observer, was killed when he was doing his job. So in a country where observers are killed, you can expect some of these problems to reflect, to manifest themselves on how governance takes place, and the difficulties in engaging these regional bodies. And PS has talked about PMCs, and perhaps the preference of Mozambique in using PMCs. It is because that is private contract, also the politics of contracting, but it is easy. It is not part of the delicate mechanisms of multilateralism that would need transparency, would need accountability, etc. So in resorting to private military groups, it is, in our view, partly feeding the monster. Feeding the monster because it gives the instruments of these leaderships to keep on going with that problem also ongoing. Mozambique is experiencing its humanitarian crisis that is not properly being dealt with. Yet we can have the SADC and entertaining, and also some of these private military groups coming here and there, but not adding to the overall framework of good governance. Lots of questions in the chat box. Chris Maloleng has left. I don't know whether there are one or two people who want to ask questions directly or make comments. I'm opening for the audience. I don't see hands from the audience. Do we have any hands from the audience? Oh yes, my good friend, Professor Thomas House, my good friend. Boa tarde.
Oh, boa tarde, amigo. Como vai?
Tudo bem. Over to you.
Parece que somos aqui os únicos bandidos. Embora... I actually also put it in the chat box. The SADC Defense Protocol is a secondary legal obligation or document, and it falls under the treaty, and it has to be read in terms of the treaty. And the treaty in Article 4 lists 5 principles as a purpose of SADC: to protect the sovereign equality of all member states, to practice solidarity, peace and security, human rights, democracy and the rule of law. Number 4, equity, balance and mutual benefit. And number 5, peaceful settlement of disputes. So before the SADC Defense Protocol can be invoked, and our South African Minister Panda doesn't seem to know that, before she can invoke it, she has to exhaust the steps to which the SADC treaty obliges the states. Namely, she has to exhaust the means of peaceful settlement of disputes. And it is still very debatable whether the insurgency in North Mozambique is an external attack on a SADC member, which would be the condition for invoking the defense protocol. Mozambique has said it is an external attack, but has never given any evidence. Who would be attacking Mozambique in its northern province? Could it be the neighboring country Tanzania? Could it be Malawi? Could it be Zambia? Could it be maybe the Seychelles or Madagascar, or maybe the French island of Mayotte? All these possible external enemies are absurd because they're obviously not at war with Mozambique. So it's very, very doubtful that the defense protocol can be invoked. And I guess this is why the SADC summit, the Troika summit just now, didn't come to any consensus about any practical actions. It simply agreed that the heads of state should meet in the future and discuss this matter further. So that is the one issue that one has to remember. The other issue is, of course, why is South Africa pushing so passionately for deploying its defense force in North Mozambique and deploying its navy? The costs are quite spectacular because a submarine of the class that South Africa has, the South African Navy only has one operational submarine, the other two are not operational. That submarine, if one factors in the very high maintenance costs, it's a bit like an aeroplane. Every 50 hours and then every 100 hours, certain things have to be done for that vessel to be safe. If one factors all the costs, including the costs of the crew in, and the very high costs of doing logistic support some 4,000 kilometers away from the Simontown submarine base, then you come to about 500,000 euros for every 24-hour day. So you come to a considerable amount of money, and who is going to pay for this? We will maybe hear tomorrow during the visit, the rather sudden visit of President Macron to South Africa, whether maybe France is actually going to offer to pay for a military intervention in North Mozambique. But then Mozambique is still a sovereign country, and according to the SADC treaty, the sovereign equality of all member states have to be respected, and no military intervention is possible without the request and the full agreement of Mozambique. So in all this, I think the situation in Cabo Delgado will continue to rest in the responsibility of the Mozambican government.
One question to you, Professor. SADC, in its charter, it has a clause which says the right to protect. There are issues in Cabo Delgado, the human suffering, the humanitarian crisis, and the possibility of regional spillover. This would give a room for SADC to be a bit more forceful.
The responsibility to protect is a new doctrine, which was essentially promoted and pushed by Australia and Canada to legitimize the interventions in Iraq and in Syria, which in terms of strict public international law were unlawful. So I don't think SADC could invoke responsibility to protect populations against the sovereignty, against the sovereign will of the Mozambican government. That would be a very dangerous precedent if a SADC force would move into Cabo Delgado without the arrangements and the consent and complete consensus of the Mozambican government. But there may, of course, be a situation where there's a humanitarian disaster, and probably 750,000 refugees without appropriate support and shelter and help are a humanitarian disaster, but that should bring in humanitarian organizations, the Red Cross, and many other organizations that should actually be duty bound to come and assist now, negotiate with Mozambique access to the refugees and what kind of assistance can be rendered. And maybe that's something that South Africa should also be proposing. How can we actually assist the victims? How can we assist those hundreds of thousands of families that are suffering, that are also in great danger to their health? That should maybe be a new focus, and maybe SADC could achieve a consensus on that. It's also much easier than operating submarines in an area which is very far away from their logistic support base.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you very much. Indeed, but there is human suffering, and international humanitarian missions are not being enough room to participate. And in fact, they have been asking for more rapid response from government, which it hasn't been forthcoming. My good friend, Tony Rila, what's your take? Towards the end, now we know the outcome of the summit. Again, it's a disappointment. Do you agree?
Well, I mean, Annalena kind of pointed out that there's something wrong within the whole framework. And somebody posted a comment that SADC is a Western construction. And I know my good friend Ibo, who was there at the beginning, might dispute that. My own interpretation of this, and we need to look at, this is one of a series of crises that happens in the region that SADC faces. My country, Zimbabwe, one of them, and many others. I would want to go to what was meant at the beginning. And one of the words that the last speaker pointed out was this word sovereign that was inserted in the original treaty. The notion that protects sovereign, that there are sovereign states. And I would suggest that the original drafters had a Pan-Africanist perspective on this thing. And in the light of where all the countries in SADC had come from, and particularly those countries that had had to struggle militarily for their survival, they saw sovereign as the protection of each other from external influence, imperialist influence. And so the notion of sovereignty was to protect each other. I also think that the belief was to attack the notion of the way in which this region that SADC is in had been so arbitrarily carved up in the late 19th century, dividing people and cultures in very egregious fashion. And the notion of that was to try and break that down, to challenge the colonial legacy. So sovereignty for me was something to protect us against them, the outside, not us against each other. But what has happened is that sovereignty has been the trump card within it, that the sovereignty of each of these nations actually works against the notion of SADC almost completely. And it forces a notion that it's a hands-off strategy. And then it feeds into all the kinds of discussions, all the kinds of issues that Annalena has raised and Webster raised. And what we have is an elite club maintaining sovereignty above the entire intention behind the SADC treaty. And what that means in the end is that the citizens actually suffer. When again and again and again, the neighbors can see things happening around them in people to whom they are linked viscerally, culturally, and yet this sovereignty notion trumps everything else. I'll be very interested for somebody who was there at the beginning. I'll be very interested to hear Ibo's comment on what is the intent, because what I see that's being implemented speaks against the spirit of SADC almost utterly and completely. And when we come to Mozambique and where it stands, it's clear from what people are saying and many observations, this is a problem coming for a very long time that we all turned our heads away from and allowed to happen. Because good neighbors actually should complain, but really, as I pointed out the other day, they don't. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We are nearing the close of our seminar today. And as we move towards the closure, we are being informed that the summit has ended, and with empty hands, a lot of expectations, but nothing concrete was decided. The heads of the state agreed to keep talking, again, reinforcing the idea that SADC, it is, as was said here, a club of the leaders, and less the SADC we want, and with less possibilities of the people influencing. Since 2003, SADC has been putting in place military structures to respond in the case of crisis. Much was not implemented. Of what was implemented, some exercise here and there have been taking place, but then the Secretariat has failed to continue that practice of joint exercise sort of preparedness to intervene in case of crisis. So we don't have a SADC, a people-centric SADC, and there is a lot of expectation from the people, but that is not met from SADC's decisions and actions, and perhaps because of this, the claims that SADC was not given enough time and space to meaningfully assess the situation in Northern Mozambique, perhaps because Mozambique not only has been reluctant, but knowing that would not give enough space for SADC to intervene. Because it seems that in parallel to that, Mozambique is engaging private military groups, but also seems to be trying to find solutions outside the region. The big question is, will SADC as a regional bloc survive a military support to Mozambique outside the region? Would SADC survive that? Would SADC remain a coherent? And some colleagues have said that that coherence, it's already not there. I mean, Tanzania did not attend the summit today. and Mozambique and Tanzania have lots of issues to solve together, and SADC would be the right platform to discuss that, but that did not happen. So when it comes to coherence, SADC seems to be really not strong in that front, and SADC itself seems to be not fully understanding the problem in Northern Mozambique, assessing that from its proposal to intervene, but there are issues as to who would pay for such a mission to Mozambique. Would SADC really have the right capacity to intervene, given the kind of challenge that Mozambique is facing in Northern Mozambique, and also given the experience of SADC in the region, in Lesotho, and in the DRC. So some of these issues, they leave this discussion today with the feeling that Mozambique's crisis will continue without SADC engaging meaningfully, or the way people have been expecting it to intervene. We will see what's going to happen, but the reality is that SADC itself, it seems not to be prepared enough to participate meaningfully. And again, as Dr. Selelwan has rightly indicated, SADC is the sum of failures of governance in the member states. But the region needs SADC. It needs a robust SADC. It needs a people-centered SADC. So ways are to be found for the people to meaningfully participate and revive the SADC. It might not be to address Mozambique crisis, but to be helpful when or if similar challenges arise in the region. This seminar today, it was taking place in the context of the summit that has ended here in Maputo today, and it was the seminar is being co-chaired by Dr. Ibo and myself, and I will hand over to Dr. Ibo for final comments and closure. Over to you, Dr. Ibo.
Muito obrigado, Adriano. Thank you. I don't have much to say. Before I thank Adriano for a fantastic job done for the last 2 hours, I just want to say the following. First, a month ago, when we first decided to have a discussion on the crisis in Cabo Delgado, the topic then, which was proposed, was the failure of a regional response to the crisis in Cabo Delgado with the SADC. And I think the discussion today really highlighted the failure, and the communique from the summit underscored. We thought yesterday, as we're finalizing the lineup for this discussion, we feared that maybe our discussion will be somewhat irrelevant, and that we would have been happily overtaken by what some of us thought would be a more robust response to the situation in Mozambique. Sadly, it's what it is. There is no regional response, which has causes us to consider more seriously the question with the SADC. as I said earlier, SADC began basically in the 1980, 1st of April 1980, as largely an forum of frontline states supporting liberation movements. And in doing so, were all supported by the Western governments at the time of the Cold War. There was a fear in the Western governments. You can read the background of this in the book that myself and Anne Torstensen edited in 1989, The History of SADC. That really, it was, as someone has commented in the chats, it was largely, yes, a Western creation for two reasons. One, to salvage the conscience of the Western countries who were also supporting South Africa, while at the same time appearing and supporting the frontline states. That's how it began. And sadly, the mission of SADC as both a mobilizer of resources and also as a front line of the fight against apartheid waned the end of apartheid. And when one writes the narrative on the decline of SADC, the role of South Africa in particular, which was the basis upon which SADC had been mobilized into a formidable force, sadly, South Africa is partly to blame for the decline of SADC. South Africa made no efforts to reconcile SACU with SADC. And indeed, in many respects, South Africa began behaving as SADC itself. And the multilateral aspect of SADC became less and less pronounced. And so we could, now another occasion, look more in detail on the causes of the decline of SADC. The decline is a reality, but we need to examine the reasons for it, the political economy aspects of it. It's a long story, and it's no use lamenting. Some of us are not surprised that there is no requisite response to the crisis in Mozambique. It's sad. We have to, and as someone just said, looks like the support is going to come from the Western countries again, from the international community. Who will be doing so also because of their own vested interests in Cabo Delgado, and less to do with the imperatives of the interests of SADC in general and Mozambique in particular. So sadly, here we have Mozambique in a crisis, and with us, the region unable to help. It is unlikely that anything will emerge out of the SADC on the 20th of June or whenever. So that's how sad things are. I'm not sure that we have answered the question. I think we have succeeded, Adriano and your team, in highlighting the failures and the reasons for the failure. And we are left with this very unfortunate acknowledgement that here the people in Cabo Delgado remain under such stressful and devastating conditions. So on that note, I want to thank Adriano, Professor Adriano Vunga, and CDD for partnering SAPES on this important discussion, which discussion was meant really to mobilize civic society across the region towards a greater understanding of the situation in Mozambique, and through that, to try and put pressure on the regional organizations, SADC and the AU, to do something about it. So until we meet again, thank again Piers, Onalina, Webster, and Brian Kagoro, and all those who have made this occasion possible. Thank you very much. Muito obrigado. Thank you.
Aê! Tango e komaka, kaina komi moto.